to introduce Mike Zamora. Mike Zamora is a AGPA and analyst with our organization, and he's been working in the Certificates of Financial Responsibility group for how long now, Mike? 5, 6 years?
Actually 4.
Okay. And so he's going to go over conceptually what we are thinking about in terms of requirements for financial responsibility.
Thank you, Yvonne. All right, I'm going to use the podium and the mic, so if I get too loud, please holler out. I'm referring to my notes a lot as well to keep me on task, so if you have any questions, holler out throughout. All right, Certificate of Financial Responsibility. Again, I work in the Financial Responsibility Unit, and we refer to certificates, financial responsibilities as COFRs. So I'm going to be referring to those throughout my program. What is a certificate of financial responsibility? It's an acknowledgement by the administrator that a company has demonstrated their financial ability to pay for costs or damages caused by an OSPR. So in other words, through our application process, we verify that the applicant is providing enough insurance to cover the cleanup if an accident happens. And we provide certificates for that. All right, so I just want to cover some of the things we currently, on the marine side, that we issue COFRs for. So we issue COFRs for tankers, which are large vessels carrying oil cargo. Non-tank vessels, which are anything over 300 gross tons. They do not carry oil as cargo, but they carry oil as fuel. So some examples are container ships, large barges, and even yachts. We currently also issue COFRs for facilities, which include examples like refineries, tank farms, production wells, and pipelines, offshore platforms and pipelines. So since we are discussing the financial coverage, I wanted to show a quick glimpse at the current existing coverage amounts that we have in place. So most of this, of course, is currently on the marine side. So tankers have a $1 billion financial requirement. Non-tanks have a $300 million maximum requirement, but they do follow a tiered system that is based on the per barrel size limits of their tanks. And our current marine facilities, they also have a $300 maximum, but their financial responsibility is based on the reasonable worst case spill volume, multiplied by the current per barrel cleanup fee. Okay, so now we get into the rail transport. Rail car financial requirements. So what should it be? We don't know. But some of the following are questions that we're looking at. The things that help us determine what the financial responsibility should be. These are also questions we would like to get feedback from the rail community about. The average number of the average number of oil tank cars being transported on a single train. Is it 50? Is it 100? We're trying to do our homework and look at different information, trying to acknowledge what that is. What is the average? We know there's short lines. We're not sure exactly how many rail cars are carrying. That's why I want to get feedback on that. This is important. It'll help us determine the financial requirement or how the financial requirement should be structured. So, also, what is the largest capacity rail car being used? So, of course, when we research this DOT 111 is the largest capacity tank car that I've been able to find. And I'm sure there's different size tank cars. We'd like to get feedback on that. Is there an average size tanker that are being used by different companies? This is going to make a big difference. We're trying to establish the volumes of oil being transported. So what should the estimated per barrel cleanup and damage cost be? Currently, we use a per barrel fee of $12,500. This was a negotiated amount that was established back in the early 90s. Is this amount still sufficient today? Is it one of the things that we're looking at? A reasonable worst case bill. We've gone over that quite a bit earlier with Chris. She's looking at it from different aspects. He's looking at it response, basically. Equipment, looking at equipment, timeframes, that sort of thing. Of course, we're looking at it from the aspect of financial coverage. Do you have enough insurance to cover your accident or spill if it happens? So I want to put an example up here. So also using the 25%. This is a concept, okay? How are we going to structure this? If we use a percentage of cars. This example shows using 25% of the cars based on 100 cars, basically. I'm seeing that that could be an average. I don't know about the short lines. So this would be, of course, equivalent to 25 cars. Each car would be using, of course, the largest capacity tank car that I mentioned earlier, which would be 821 barrels. And we will multiply this by our current 12,500 per barrel fee. The total for the 25% of the total carrying capacity would be 256,500. Unlimited liability on response costs and damages. Okay. Together, eventually, we're going to determine what the financial responsibility amount should be. But this is just a reminder: the company must assess their own risk and for the coverage amounts needed. Because eventually, if we do have a maximum amount required, this will not limit the liability in California. And Ryan actually touched on this earlier, the COBRA options. I just wanted to put it out there and make sure you guys know there are different options. Insurance, self-insurance, one of the most popular. Okay. So just kind of as a heads up, if a company does plan to self-insure, we do require the company to meet the financial criteria in our regulations, as well as provide audited financial statements annually. That's basically all I have. Let me summarize.
So I know that we're getting close to lunch, and so this again comes down to gathering input from you all while you're here as to, again, we're back to the reasonable worst case spill. We're not thinking about having a different reasonable worst case spill volume for purposes of COFRs and for purposes of contingency plan requirements, right? A reasonable worst case spill volume is a reasonable worst case spill volume. But so again, if you had other comments having to do with the reasonable worst case spill volume for railroad, that's one question. And then the second question is, there is this negotiated amount years back now for the amount of money required per barrel cleanup cost, and is that a reasonable place for us to start? Do you have a better number, or do you have a better suggestion? So any additional input from what we haven't heard this morning on reasonable worst case spill volumes in terms of it being a percentage of whatever a maximum might be that a particular railroad covers? Please.
Is your per barrel cleanup cost based on your marine history?
It was negotiated, I don't know, maybe Ryan knows?
Ryan's gone, but
Steve
Steve
Sawyer, okay, please.
No, it's really not based on the negotiated amount back in the early 90s. We did fund a study that showed that $18,900 was a reasonable cost back then. And our question is that a reasonable cost for an inland spill? Should an inland spill be higher or lower? Those are the kinds of things that we're grappling with. We could take the 12.5 preliminarily in our emergency regs and then look at whether or not that's an adequate amount. But those are the kinds of things that I don't think we're going to have an answer for or to, once we get these numbers to their notes. But 12.5 has always been a low amount.
Yes, James?
On the railroad, is that percentage, would they have to apply that to every train that they move and have that amount of money for each? I mean, there's more than one train coming through California at night.
So,
So we're looking at the averages, really, with the company. The amount of cars we know can vary from day to day. So that's why we're kind of going with this concept of looking at the average amount of.
So if there's 50 trains coming through Reading, would it be 50 times that?
That-
250
That one company would have the financial requirement. They would let us know what their averages are, how many tank cars to each city we move through. So we base it on that, not off of each train.
right, so certificate of financial responsibility is an amount of insurance, for lack of a better way of saying it, that a company has to provide on a yearly basis that shows that they can address a reasonable worst-case spill as identified in their contingency plan, right? It isn't based on, will they run that train 50 times versus they run that train 10 times, right? Because if one of those goes awry, regardless, there's still going to be a cleanup requirement. Yes, please. All right.
Is that cost borne by the rail carrier or the owner of the product, or is it negotiated between the rail carrier and the customer?
Steve?
Yes.
Okay?
Well, I mean, the requirement for damages and cleanup can both be on the operator and the owner of the oil. I don't know how this business is going to work, whether or not the owner of the oil is going to reimburse the operator or vice versa. We, in any action after an oil spill, will look at cause. And if the cause of the spill is the operator of the railroad, then that's going to be the defendant in the case.
Yes, please.
Are you doing any analysis on the spills that have happened recently and how much they cost to clean up to create some of your baseline numbers going forward?
That is information that we are gathering right now. So we are also, if there's additional information that you have, from California, not from California, nationwide, any of a number of other things, this was a place for us to start because this is what we have already in regulations. Please, Todd.
So it's COFR,
Yeah.
it has to be the operator, right? It can't be the cargo owner as well as the carrier, because then, so we don't have anything related to rail, but it's our cargo on there. We have to then produce a COFR every time a company, one of the rail lines is doing it. The COFR is for the operator because they're the responsible party, right?
Steve?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we have on the marine side, we have owners, the operator and the owner of the oil can be liable.
Can be liable because the cargo
Correct.
is liable to the state.
So, and I would assume in this inland realm, as in the marine side, the vessel operator and the owner of the oil have some agreement on whose COFR.
There's no, all our equipment, all the barrels that are moved for us up and down the coast there's no shell, there's no COFR that we have to produce for that. It's the operator. Under OPA 90 and under the regulations. So this is a whole nother,
So Todd, I
We
will
also
make
have to
sure
remember the
that,
distinction between a COFR and liability.
now we're talking about COFRs.
very clear on that.
COFRs.
COFR is just, it's insurance, or it's just that you, the person, the operator, that is bringing that product, that the assurance to the state of California, there's a federal COFR and there's state COFR. Do the rail carriers have to have a federal COFR for transportation?
I can't speak to that.
Okay,
Because if they do, that would be a really easy way
right.
to find out what we should be,
Okay.
what you guys should be looking for to give that.
So Todd, I will make sure that Joy takes down both your your input having to do with, it should be the carrier of the oil as opposed to the owner of the oil for purposes of COFERS, not responsibility or liability, excuse me. And for us to determine whether or not there are federal COFERS sort of analogous to what we're proposing, and then see what they have in there in terms of per barrel cleanup, reasonable worst case spill. Of course, they work on a worst case discharge, but, and see, and just make sure that we are addressing things consistently. Okay, Terry.
Some of the other considerations that's unique with the rail transportation system that we have is, one, you have the carrier that you're talking about, the train operator.
Right.
You also have the car owners.
Correct.
Because the railroads don't own the cars.
Correct.
And the oil companies don't own the cars.
Correct.
And then you have the track owners.
Correct.
Because nobody else does.
Got it.
So the operator is the only one that you're going to be regulating.
That was what Todd wanted to input to us. If you want to input that to us something different, this would be your opportunity to do that. You're shaking your head, but I don't know what that means. Yes.
No, I understand.
Okay. Yes, please.
You may also want to check, I guess, with the PUC, I don't know if anybody's here from that, but they regulate the railroad
They
as a
do.
utility,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So whether or not there's any kind of insurance liability issues there, because as FRA, we enforce the transportation regulations.
Correct.
We do not get into.
You don't get into the track, right?
Issues like that.
Right. And we've been working consistently with PUC. So, Joy, if you can take that down for us to reach back to PUC again, specifically as it relates to COFERS and responsibility, that would be great. Please.
I think maybe another thing to take into consideration is when somebody has an oil spill on the water, it's not affecting a populated area because nobody lives on, like in the middle of the ocean. But if they have a spill near our Poudre Creek, that could be right in the heart of the city of Davis.
Right.
So the cost could be a lot higher.
Right.
Because it's a highly densely populated area.
Right, so it gets back down to what is a reasonable number for that per barrel amount. Jane?
We could look at the spill on the Smith River and figure out how much it costs to clean up that one truckload of oil that went to the Smith River, because, you know, there wasn't many people around, and that's a wild and scenic river, and they had to do an awful lot of treatment to treat that so that it wouldn't affect the river even what we do.
Okay, so maybe take a look at recent examples in California. Right, Smith River being one of them. Okay, any other questions or comments on certificates of financial responsibility? Any questions for Mike? Yes, please.
One broad question. This bill covers rail, pipeline production, and facilities. Is that the only modes of transportation that it covers, or are there others that might be expected to cover by this?
Steve? I'm sorry?
Trucks. You left out the truck was.
Yes or no?
I'll be back,
So what I'll have Joy put down is to provide specific clarification of what is truly covered and what modes of transportation are covered by this change in statute, right? Okay. Any other questions?
Yvonne, I have a
Yes, please, Matt.
Do you want to kind of explain the process now to everybody as how, going forward,
Yeah,
what the process is?
that is my next and last slide.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. Yes, please.
Yeah, just have a point of clarification. You base this on 25% of a 100-car train,
That again was an example.
but you came up with a number.
Okay?
So if you're coming up with a number, it could vary depending on how many cars are affected, even if you have an average number for the train.
Okay, right. So,
So I guess the question is,
okay?
if you set an insurance threshold number, maximum number,
Mhm.
what happens if the costs exceed that, or they're lower than that? Is it the actual expenses that you're seeking to?
Okay, the certificate of financial responsibility is, for lack of another way of saying it, an insurance policy. You may remember on Mike's second slide, I think, or third slide, that said actual response costs. Your certificate of financial responsibility does not limit you to that amount. If the actual response costs are higher, you pay the actual response costs. You are the responsible party. You are responsible for mitigating that spill.
This is a good thing.
Well, this is an example, and don't make me try and do a iron mouth in front of everybody, but if your risk poses $1 billion, right? But your certificate of financial responsibility and your company is only worth $10,000, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
But if we do set maximums, then yes, we will not require you to have anything over that. So,
But it doesn't mean that you're not going to be required to pay it
That's not
if you exceed that in a real spill. This is, again, a planning. This is a good faith. This is, can you show us that you have the ability on the planning side to do contingency planning, drills and exercises, and that you financially have somewhere close to the ballpark of what we expect a response of a reasonable worst-case spill is going to take place. If it's a worst-case discharge, if all 100 cars go over, then it's probably going to be potentially more, or it might be less, depending on the environment, right? This is that ballpark
How
effort.
do you verify those costs, and is there a time frame?
Which costs
Cost per cleaner?
during an event?
Yes, and what's the time frame? Is there a statute of limitation time frame in the future for those costs?
Steve? I mean, I can say that, every day there is what we call a burn rate during an event, right? Every day there is a report by the end of the day of how much money has been spent in response to this. So you get that daily, but
It's unlimited liability in California. The responsible party is liable for all costs, and there is no statute of limitations as far as, is it the cost that incurred in the first year, first 6 months, first month. It's all costs. There's also a whole section on what responsible parties are liable for, and it's not just response costs and natural resource damages. There's non-economic loss. So that's in 8670.56.5. So you can see what potentially a responsible party can be liable for. So you don't want to take the COFR, whatever COFR limit we establish or COFR amount we establish. Hopefully there's a relationship to the maximum liability, but in many cases, and you look at this bill in Quebec, the liability in that case is so much higher than whatever the COFA requirement was. It oftentimes doesn't compare.
yes, Bill.
Deepwater Horizon, it's a large one, but
That's large.
was talking with Department of Justice a couple days ago. I think they settled with the plaintiffs, with industry fishermen. They're looking at $19 billion for that, an additional $19 billion for the federal government fines on the civil side, and that does not even include natural resource damage assessment. It is unlimited.
Right, and our COFR does not cover fines and penalties, and that's not a component of our COFR.
Yeah, that doesn't include the response costs.
Right.
That's just after the fact.
Right. So any other questions or comments on certificates of financial responsibility? Going once? Twice? Okay, so next steps, Randy, it's at the end of my, awesome, you're awesome. So what can you expect from us? What's the follow-up after this, obviously? So we are going to take in all the comments that you all provide, whether you provide it here or if you send in written comments. I would suggest you do that sooner as opposed to later. We are then going to take those comments and we are going to begin the drafting of the regulations. That's going to be done internally. There'll be an internal review of that. And then we're looking at September, October timeframe. Again, these are emergency regulations. We are required to do emergency regulations, so we don't have the benefit of taking 2 years to get them done. For as Those of you may remember on the marine side, we did emergency regulations and then spent the next year and a half getting the other regulations through. We will circulate an informal draft to stakeholder comments and sister agency comments. Hopefully we'll be able to get to sister agencies before then. It's just going to kind of depend on what that looks like in terms of timeframes. And then we are looking at submission to Office of Administrative Law late fall. So we're saying November, December. Okay? It's a tight timeline, and we get that. Steve, did you have I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just had a comment.
Yeah.
For those of you with silver hair who were around back in the early 90s, OSPR was trying to educate ourselves on industry, what the industry's about, and we're having that same issue now, what's actually out there. So I was just talking to Tom, and we may have to have more work groups, maybe more focused work groups in the area of what really is a reasonable worst case spill. What, some of these questions that we really can't answer.
In a
Trying to write the emergency regs, but I think input from local agencies and the OSROs about what's really out there we may have to do that. I think we probably will have to do that. And so the time frame that Yvonne's talking about, we're looking at probably doing that in the next 60 days.
Okay, excellent. Please.
Yeah, Yvonne.
Yeah.
We have these work groups for the marine environment. The effective part is you kind of broke it down to those people that have a particular interest in a particular aspect, which is what you have here.
Right.
Because there's different rail versus facilities and so on. You might want to do that. And then your informal draft time frame and the submittal to OEL, I think you need to send the right message, because I think your informal draft is going to be your draft. You really don't have a lot of time here to do a draft regulation, then you're going to come out with a final regulation. Take a look at that schedule.
Okay.
And so at least stakeholders understand what you're talking about, is they don't have time.
Okay. Very good. So I don't know if this is easy or hard, but in terms of work groups, if you want to take a look at, if maybe before you leave sometime today, on the sign-in sheet, if there's a particular work group that you would be interested in, like reasonable worst case spill or COFRs or drills and exercises, maybe just make a mark next to your name, like if it's COFR, put in COFR, if it's C plans, put in C plans, if it's D&E, put in D&E, so that we can take a first initial cut of what that might be. Please.
Can you clarify?
Okay.
At what point you cannot talk to outsiders in this process?
At what point we cannot talk to
Taking
outsiders?
input from
Right.
stakeholders, and then at some point you have to stop that input and can't. So where is it on the schedule?
Do you have a sense of that, Joy?
Well, I was just going to say, the federal process, they do have that where they will stop taking input. We stop taking input when we get the final draft out, when it gets submitted to OAL, the final emergency rulemaking process. But yeah, I know the federal government has this window where you can't call, you can't ask, you can only submit comments, but it's not a dialogue. We don't have that.
Was there another? Yes, Brian.
So I recall, so the rules will be reviewed for a year by OAL, correct?
No, okay, let's see if I can say, so the emergency regs get put into place, let's just say that that's January 1, just for purposes of an easy number, okay? Those regs are in place for a year, okay? Was that your question? Right, perfect.
And who do we send comments to, written comments to you?
Can they go to you, Joy? Yeah, Joy Lavin-Jones?
I have cards somewhere, I'll put them out on the table. Yeah, I don't.
Very good. And we will also have this information, I think we have some stuff on our website, so we will go ahead and post where you need to send that information on our website as well. Yeah, there was yes, please.
Just one last thing.
Yeah.
The NPRM just came out for the new generation tank cars and other rules which the railroads are going to have to comply with.
Okay.
You may have to look at your whole risk assessment and your COFR based on those new tank cars and on those new rules, because it does change something.
Okay.
the dynamics of the rail car and transport.
Okay, well, we obviously are very interested and excited, if that's the right word you can use, to continue to work with our rail counterparts, right? Because we want something that makes sense, we want something that is value added, and something that conforms to requirements in law. Absolutely. Yeah, Jane?
A real wild card that is in my mind now is the whole trucks on the freeway. I mean, have you brought those stakeholders into this? I mean, I'm sure that this is their, almost all the inland spills I work on are coming out of a truck.
Okay.
And it just seems like that's a pretty big gap.
Okay. Very good. Yes, Steve?
Chris is, he's got some sign-up sheets out here on the table, right, Chris?
Yeah, and once this is over, I'll just give you a kind of a rundown of what kind of groups we started to put in place, and then at lunch, we're gonna try to refine that, those
Okay.
work groups, so
Okay.
this sign up sheet.
Okay.
One, be part of it.
So any other, I am mindful of, we're hitting up against our quarter afters, we're past our quarter after, sorry. So any other quick questions?